Hi, Martin. It's great to connect today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
So, you've just written a book with your co-author Bob Goodson about the like button, and I'm curious to hear about the lesson or story from the book that you'd most like to share with others.
Um, I think how the book came about is largely reflective of the content of the book. So let me tell you the story, the origin of the book. I was just getting to know Bob, and we were having coffee, and I learned during the course of this coffee conversation that Bob was a hoarder, and he's collected every train ticket since he was 10 or something, and he was moving. So just to make conversation, I said, "Well, you're probably discovering interesting things in your boxes." And he said, "Oh, you bet, you know." So he pulled out a sketchbook, and I was leafing through the sketchbook, and I saw a hand-drawn sketch of the like button, and I looked at the date, and the date was well in advance of Facebook's introduction of the like button. And so I said to Bob, "So you're telling me you invented the like button?" And he said, "No, of course not." Well, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And so this half-hour conversation turned into a whole day of conversation about, well, who did invent the like button? And what we found, and then a subsequent 3 years of research on who invented the like button. And essentially what we found is that it's very hard to say who invented the like button because we stumbled across this thing that happens whenever you look deeply into an individual discovery or an invention, which is it's extremely social. There was an environment where lots of people were working on very similar things. There are lots of forgotten heroes, um, lots of serendipity, people sort of setting out to do one thing and accidentally doing something else, lots of delay. The thing which appeared useless at the time sort of bounces back as being very useful. And then the ultimate ramifications and consequences, the way that we tell the story backwards in retrospect, turns out to be, far more rational sounding than it actually happened. So you could say that the this book about the like button is about how human innovation, really works. It's the opposite of far-sighted, heroic, predictable, deliberate, instantaneous. It's very social. It's very tactical. People are setting out to solve a small problem and accidentally solve a bigger problem. It's unpredictable. It's accidental. It's protracted. It's serendipitous. And so that remembering that I think changes everything because rather than a very excuse me deliberate program of setting out to solve a major world problem, I think if we tune ourselves into who else is working on the problem, what are some different ways of looking at the problem? When we try to do X, what actually happened? What's the reframing to actually see the possibility of Y? I think all of that has tremendous consequences for daily innovation and commercial innovation. So that to me is one of the big picture themes in the book. Allow me a second, if I may. Second is the like button is a technological invention, right? It's a piece of code. But of course, it's also a gestural linguistic invention. And I was fascinated if you go back to, thousands of years that just how technology and human communication and culture co-evolve. Essentially every time you expand the reach of communication, you lose a bit of context. You lose emotional content, for example, and people innovate to put it back. And you could think of the like button as a piece of digital punctuation that puts back some of the emotional content that evaporates when you have broad reach internet communication. So those are two of the big themes for me that still fascinate me.
Yes, I think it's interesting if we think about inventors and something that, we attribute to a single inventor. And
Mm.
while I'm sure there are some things that have been more or less kind of invented by a single person, if you really drill down, like, was anything ever invented by a single
Well,
person?
of course, we have many stories saying it was, and where like me saying it wasn't.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we start to have some scientific proof that actually this sort of solitary, far-sighted, heroic, instantaneous invention model is actually quite rare. So there was a major study recently since we published the book, of scientific papers, and what it compared was the intentions as expressed in the grant proposal, which funded the research, and then the actual paper itself that was funded by the grant. And what it shows is that in something like 70% of papers, something other than the intended conclusion was reached. So it seems that in the realm of scientific discovery and research, it's almost always serendipitous. And we do look at a bunch of other inventions in the book. We focus on the like button because we think there's tremendous color and depth and detail in the microcosm of one story. The trouble with sort of statistical samples and so on is that they suppress quirky detail. And if the point is that you're studying serendipity, actually the quirky particulars actually become the point. So you don't want to suppress all of the details and the accidents and the analogies because in a way that's the point. But we do look at other inventions, and like a very classic one is the Humphrey Davy safety lamp. So I've actually touched the Humphrey Davy safety lamp. It was a very simple design. It was essentially a piece of copper gauze around a candle to solve a very specific and simple problem, which is that the Industrial Revolution was in the UK was in danger of being undermined by gas explosions, methane explosions in mines, killing hundreds of miners. And so Humphrey Davy at the Royal Institution receives this request from the miners of the Felling Colliery, where there was a massive accident, and in the space of a couple of weeks, he comes up with his design for the safety lamp, and mining becomes instantly much safer, and it's very cheap to produce this invention, the safety lamp. Well, it's a very clear story. We all actually learn about it in schools in the UK, and it turns out to be not quite true. It turns out that actually Stevenson was working on a very similar lamp at the same time. Somebody called Clancy was working on a slightly different design. It turns out that the original design of Humphrey's lamp didn't actually work. I've actually used it in a demonstration for a presentation I gave at the Royal Institution, and it actually didn't prevent the simulated gas explosion. And interestingly, the curator of the scientific objects of the Royal Institution shared with me that it's often the case that the first prototype, the thing that was supposed to be the solution, doesn't actually work. For instance, Michael Faraday's original electric motor, there's a speculation as to whether it ever actually worked or not. So there's far more serendipity, accident, exaggeration, rivalry, forgotten heroes than we credit, even for the apparently clear-cut stories.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we zoom in like you're doing, it's debatable whether or not uh it's ever a single person, and it seems like the evidence suggests it's never a single person. And then as soon as you even start zooming out the tiniest bit, it's like, well, you didn't invent the wheel, and you didn't figure out how to harness electricity, and you didn't invent the internet, and all of these things, but for all of these things, we could have never invented this new thing. And so even as you start to zoom out a little bit, it demonstrates how important collaboration is. And to me, this is inspiring because it makes me, it's like provides hope that, like I can do something great, but it's always going to be in the context of working with other people.
Right, I think we're intrinsically social species, and we're all, many of us at any one time are subject to the same pressures and problems and opportunities. So not surprisingly, we have parallel innovation, we have plagiarism. I mean, the idea that inventions are private property is a relatively recent invention in human
Yeah.
history, of course. The patent system, the idea which reinforces the notion that there's a single inventor. So we dug quite deeply into this. I mean, it's a very tiny thing, the like button, but we dug into it. I think it's probably the most complete study of the like button there's ever been. And if you say to me, okay, well, net, who invented the like button? I'd probably come back to you with a question, which is, well, according to what exact definition of the like button? Because it turns out that there were voting buttons at the time that were not exactly the like button. There were like buttons that didn't use the thumbs up symbol. There were um, uh, an, another function of the like button at the time There was a sort of a convergence in the problem that the like button was solving, but at the time it was trying to solve many problems. One problem was voting, which is do you like this or not? Another one was who do you like? Affiliation. Do you like this person? Do you like this person's post? Another one was uncluttering content feeds. I mean, if everybody puts a single word in your content feed, great, wonderful. You get sort of pages of stuff that's not very interesting to read. So the like button essentially cleans up the very brief content and puts it into a single symbol. There's a counting mechanism, like a social voting mechanism, like who is most liked, who is most popular, and um, and all of these functionalities are trying to solve problems at the time and subject to a massive constraint. The constraint is that if you do anything fancy as a solution to any of these problems, it triggers a page refresh. And if you remember back to the early days of the internet, a page refresh lost you up to 30 seconds. And so this was all had to happen. The innovation here was that this had to happen in the browser without triggering a page refresh. So, there was this tremendous dispersion in the problems being solved. And then all of these little solutions to little problems bumped into a massive problem, which is the monetization of mechanism for social media as a business. Social media was not a business for a very long time until somebody figured out that, hey, the old joke about advertising could be solved with a like button. Half of my advertising doesn't have any effect. I just don't know which half. That was the traditional nature of advertising. But by having this sort of granular, low cost, instantaneous feedback mechanism, you could actually say, well, dear advertiser, you can pay me for the evidence, the proof that your advertising had some impact. So this was the birth of social media as a multi-billion dollar business, and also the birth of digital advertising. So this tiny button that set out to solve a collection of small problems actually solves a very big problem, blows up an industry, and creates a host of social problems that require regulatory innovation. So the connectedness of these innovations, and every innovation creates new problems which beget new innovations, is this sort of grand social tapestry of innovative history, which is fascinating for me to contemplate after having looked at this tiny single thread of the like button.
It reminds me of the quote, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Mm.
And to think about all of the things that such a simple button accomplishes is pretty mind-blowing, actually, is to hear you lay it out. Like, wow, a simple button did all of this, affects so many industries, creates so many new problems that governments and schools and parents are still trying to cope with. Well, this is so interesting. I've ordered the book. I look forward to reading it. Any final thing you'd like to share as we wrap up here, Martin?
Um, I guess another what just one more interesting thing is how we chose to write the book. So I'm a business researcher. I write books for business people, strategy books mainly, and um, but we chose to write a book with no no two by twos, no lists of bullet points. We chose to write a narrative book, and the reason we did that was that um, the details, the quirks, the accidents, the anomalies, in a way, they are the point in innovation process, and also I think they're the point uh, for humans looking for learning and entertainment. I mean, if you distill something down too much, you end up with something which is, very averaged out, very dry. So the form of the book actually started as a joke with my publisher. After a couple of martinis over lunch, the publisher asked me, my publisher asked me, so what's the next big project, Martin? And I said, well, I've got one for you. How about we actually write a business book that's interesting to read? And the publisher said, oh, no, no, we could never possibly do that. And so we determined that we were going to try to do that. I mean, our readership will tell us whether we succeeded or not. But we deliberately wrote it as a storybook, which didn't suppress all of the sort of quirky individual details. And I guess our claim is that, sometimes the learnings are in the exceptions, are in the quirkier parts of the story, not in the
Yeah.
not in the sort of average or the mean or the theory. So it's not a theory-led book. We back into theory a little bit on questions like is anything new under the sun? How does innovation actually work? But we start off with very particular stories.
Well, I suspect that in many ways this is going to do a better job of capturing how innovation really works because it's not often linear. And like you're saying, it's not it's so often not attributable to just one person. So, Martin, this has really intrigued me. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I look forward to sharing this with others.
Yeah, thank you very much.